This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about one way that the U.S. government can use to destroy Bitcoin. This is not silly theories like they're going to hack the algorithm or that there's some backdoor to SHA-256 that was left there by the NSA. It's not a theory like that. It's actually a much simpler version, and it has to do with the fact that right now Coinbase is the number one app in the App Store right now. The Apple App Store. This is a very good sign, of course, that we're about to get huge retail flows into Bitcoin. So it's very bullish short term for the price. But companies like Coinbase really are an existential threat to Bitcoin. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, how the US government can use them to basically functionally destroy Bitcoin. It goes something like this. We have all these ways of buying Bitcoin now, which is actually very good. It's very good for adoption. Everything from Coinbase, Gemini, Kraken, Square, the Cash App, PayPal, Robinhood, GBTC, the ETF, the new Bitcoin ETF, the futures ETF, BITO. So these are different ways that you can buy Bitcoin. But the biggest problem that is caused by them is that people buy Bitcoin using these different channels, and then they leave their Bitcoin. They leave it on the app. They leave it on the exchange. They leave it somewhere where it's held by what's called a custodian. So if you leave your Bitcoin wherever you buy it and you don't withdraw it and hold it and control your own private keys, you are basically allowing someone else to hold your private keys for you. This is what's called a custodial solution. You may see the phrase non-custodial wallet. That means basically you get to hold your own private keys. A custodial wallet, or leaving your Bitcoin at Coinbase or Kraken or Gemini, or leaving it on the Cash App or on PayPal, basically you're leaving your Bitcoin in the control of what's called a custodian. A custodian is just someone who holds on to your Bitcoin for you. And a lot of these companies, they're well run. Their custodians are fairly safe. At least we think they're safe. Again, if you're not controlling your own private keys, you're not really controlling your own destiny. The way you can know whether you are holding your own private keys is whether you need to ask someone to move your Bitcoin for you. So for example, if you're holding Bitcoin on BlockFi and you want to withdraw it, it might take 2, 3, 5, 7 days to withdraw it, and you have to send them an email or click something on their website, get permission from them. Likewise with Coinbase, you have to ask them to withdraw your Bitcoin. And this is how you know that someone else is controlling your Bitcoin. If you have Bitcoin in a hardware wallet, for example, you can send it to anyone anytime you want. It's instantaneous. It's instantaneous if you send it using the Lightning Network. If you send it using the base layer, take anywhere from 10 to 60 minutes to confirm. This is what happens when you control your own keys. Now, this is very important, and we're going to see the reason why, and why not controlling your own keys is an existential threat to Bitcoin. If you bought GBTC, for example, which is a trust that holds Bitcoin, their actual Bitcoin is being held by Coinbase custody. So what you have when you own GBTC, it's basically paper Bitcoin, or it's a Bitcoin IOU. The real Bitcoin, and it's hopefully there, we assume it's there, it's being held by Coinbase custody. If you buy Bitcoin and leave it on BlockFi, it's basically being held by another custodian, the Gemini Trust Company. We already talked about Coinbase custody. This is probably the biggest custody company in the world right now. It's a separate, I believe it's a slightly separate company from Coinbase. They have two legal entities. BitGo is another really big one, a custodian that was really more for institutional investors. They've recently been acquired by Galaxy Digital. So we can see a world where we have just a few large custodians. This is how it always happens. They're economies of scale, and they're very good business reasons if you're a custodian to grow your book. But the problem is Bitcoin custodians like Coinbase custody, like BitGo, like Gemini Trust Company, these are like giant banks full of Bitcoin. And now there's a process underway to allow actual US banks to custody Bitcoin as well, rather than these specialized entities. So you can have Wells Fargo become a Bitcoin custodian, or Goldman Sachs, heaven forbid. So now let's fast forward a couple years from now. This is not a threat today or tomorrow or next year, or probably even the next year. But let's fast forward maybe 5 years. Imagine a world where 2 or 3 Bitcoin custodians are holding most of the world's Bitcoin. Most of the U.S.'s Bitcoin, most of the world's Bitcoin, however you want to imagine it. And then remember what happened back in 1933 with Executive Order 6102. This was the executive order signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, making the private holding of gold illegal. There were some loopholes for dentists and jewelry, but basically this is how it worked. You were required to give the U.S. government all of your gold. They bought it from you. They're very generous. They bought it for you for $20.67 an ounce. And once they had bought up all the gold, they immediately revalued it to $35. This was one way they funded. They basically added a lot of value to the U.S. government balance sheet. And this is where most of the gold in Fort Knox came from. It came from confiscating it from the American people, the land of the free, the home of the brave. This was already happening under one of our worst presidents, who was FDR. Now, this was especially easy for the U.S. government to do since most of the gold was sitting in bank vaults already. If you want something to be taken from you, a bank is probably the best place to store it. There's that old saying, the guy who robs banks and says why does he rob banks? Because that's where the money is. The U.S. government has a history of robbing banks as well. There's the famous case of this New York attorney named Frederick Barber Campbell. This is from the same Wikipedia article. I just excerpted it here. He was storing his gold, 5,000 ounces, at Chase National Bank. He tried to withdraw it, and Chase refused to give it to him. And basically he went to court and lost, and the federal government was able to seize his gold. This is just one of many cases. As I said, the absolute worst place to store something is at a bank if you distrust your government. Now, I would say the U.S. is not quite there yet, but we're definitely getting there. And the talk of an unrealized capital gains tax, which we talked about a couple of days ago, it looks like this is out of the bill, so it's not going to happen. But when you start seeing even potential ideas like this discussed, you know that your government is becoming less and less trustworthy. So how can the U.S. government destroy Bitcoin? The first step is allow Bitcoin to become concentrated at 2 to 3 custodians. And once this has happened, and this could be done in coordination with various world governments, maybe with the EU or China, and there could be a global concentrated effort at some point. Again, I don't think this is going to happen next year or even the next year, but you could, if the Bitcoin is all being held at these large institutional custodians, all you need to do is do a coordinated seizure of these custodians and take the Bitcoin. And then they could revalue it for themselves, or they could just say, we're holding it, we're not allowing it to circulate anymore, something like this. And they'd be able to do this since you are not holding your own private keys. When you store your Bitcoin, when you leave it on an exchange, who leaves it with? A custodian. If all 330 million Americans end up owning Bitcoin, and they're holding their own Bitcoin, they're holding their own private keys, this can never happen. Bitcoin was intended to be this freedom technology, this form of decentralized money. And what's happening because of giant companies like Coinbase, which are opening up the market to new investors, which is great, though Coinbase, of course, seems right now is much more focused on pushing garbage NFTs and all of their casino coins. But you can't deny that they're helping adoption. But what we really need now is the education, and that's really what I'm focused on in this channel, is to teach people how to hold Bitcoin. If you hold your own Bitcoin, if you control your own private keys, it's better for you because no one can confiscate your Bitcoin. And it's also better for the Bitcoin ecosystem and the future of Bitcoin because it doesn't end up being concentrated and being held by people like Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, and eventually possibly being seized by hostile governments. I was thinking about this the other day, and someone had asked me what the most widely used layer 2 is on Bitcoin. We have the base layer of the blockchain, and then we have various technologies built on top of it. We have the Lightning Network, we have the Liquid Network. These are well-known side chains or layer 2 solutions. But they're not, I don't think they're the most widely used layer 2 solution on Bitcoin. I think layer 2 is really, unfortunately, all of these companies. People will enter Bitcoin, they'll move their They'll move their Bitcoin from Coinbase to Gemini, especially if they're doing high frequency trading. Maybe they'll just they'll buy Bitcoin on Robinhood, and you can't even withdraw it from there. And this is sort of the layer 2, the most widely adopted form of layer 2 for Bitcoin. Basically, Bitcoin that circulates inside of these big tech companies. And I think this is a very bad place for it. It's bad for Bitcoin. It's bad for individual holders of Bitcoin. The real layer 2 solution should be decentralized solutions like the Lightning Network, for example. So what do you do if you own Bitcoin, if you're storing it at a place like BlockFi, if you're storing it at a place like Coinbase, or really any of these companies? You need to withdraw your Bitcoin, both for the safety of your coins, but also to help the ecosystem. If you believe in the Bitcoin mission, you need to buy a hardware wallet. Blockstream Jade looks really cool. I haven't tried it out yet, but this is a very legit company, completely open source hardware wallet. In the past, I've recommended Trezor. Again, I'm not being paid by any of these companies. I have been using the Trezor in the past, and I'm looking also to explore the Blockstream Jade hardware wallet. The one wallet I would not recommend is the Ledger Nano. They have some non-open source software. Their firmware, for example, is not open source. The problem with this is you don't know what is in there. The nice thing about Trezor and Blockstream is their code, their firmware, their software is completely open source. And so you can see whether there are any backdoors, whether there's any hostile code in there, and there's constantly a stream of eyes on the internet looking at their code. People can't do that for Ledger. So Ledger seems to be an honest company at this point, but if it were ever to be taken over by dishonest actors at a point later in the future, they could insert some code onto their hardware wallets and in one fell swoop confiscate everyone's Bitcoin who's holding it on a Ledger wallet. So all you need to do, it's actually much more simple than it sounds. You buy one of these hardware wallets, and then you just go to the help section of Coinbase or wherever you buy your Bitcoin, and they'll tell you how to withdraw it. You click a withdraw button, and you send it to the public address that's associated with your hardware wallet. This sounds difficult, but again, it's actually quite easy to do. I always get the question too, though. People say, well, I only have 0.01 Bitcoin, which at today's prices is worth about $610. Does it really make sense for me to buy a hardware wallet for $50 to $150? I think the Blockstream Jade is closer to $50. If you get the Trezor Model T, it's closer to $150, $200. So it doesn't really make sense to spend $150 on something if what you're storing on there is only worth $610. Well, I think you have to look forward, though. If you're holding Bitcoin for the long term, it means you're bullish on it. And I'm extremely bullish on it. In a few years, when Bitcoin hits $1 million per coin, that 0.01 Bitcoin that you own is going to be worth $10,000 instead. So at that point, it really does make sense to invest $150 or $50 to $150 to secure $10,000. When Bitcoin goes up another 10x, that 0.01 Bitcoin will be worth $100,000, hopefully in today's purchasing power. And so you should really learn how to do this while Bitcoin is still relatively cheap and while the dollar amounts that you're dealing with are still relatively small. And when you move your Bitcoin from the exchange, from Coinbase to a Trezor to a Blockstream Jade, you move a very small amount at first. Maybe move just $5 or $10 or $20 or whatever a small amount is for you, just to test it and to make sure that you've done it in the right way. Here's the takeaway. People leaving Bitcoin on their exchanges is not just an existential threat to their wealth, to their own holdings, because anyone can confiscate it. U.S. government can come to BlockFi or Coinbase and say you're actually a bad person, freeze your account. This can happen, but it cannot happen if you're holding your own private keys. If we do end up with a situation in 5 or 10 years from now where Bitcoin is overwhelmingly concentrated on exchanges and being held by just a few custodians, there's a real existential threat to the system. And this is not what Satoshi intended. This is not how Bitcoin is intended to be used. We need to make sure that it remains highly decentralized and that people are running their own nodes, they're controlling their own Bitcoin, they're holding their own private keys. And I should have mentioned that the way you hold your own private keys, this is the function of a hardware wallet. Your Bitcoin is not stored on a hardware wallet. It's essentially just a an item in the ledger, in the open ledger, which is the blockchain. But what your hardware wallet does is it stores your private key. And then when you want to move your Bitcoin, you basically plug in your hardware wallet, you sign with it, you do a signature with it, and then that moves your Bitcoin. It's very important as well when you set up a Trezor or a Blockstream Jade to make a recovery seed backup. This is 12 or 24 words. In case your hardware wallet gets destroyed or lost, you can reconstitute your holdings using your recovery seed, which again is like 12 very simple English words. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.